A pastor is that you get to share in people's lives, often in some of the deepest or most difficult experiences that they have. And that includes being with people as they prepare for death, to be with people as they go through that process, to sit with them as they die, or to be with relatives, trying to work out, well, how do I live now, having lost that person who was precious to me? It's made me think about death perhaps more than I would have otherwise. I've had my own near-death experiences. A couple of times I nearly drowned, and I've had an accident or two, and I thought, wow, this is it for me. And it wasn't. In more recent years, I've been in the doctor's surgery waiting for the results of tests that were anticipated to be not good, but thankfully have been okay, and that was that. Second half of last year, though, I came back from a holiday and was in and out of emergency for quite an extended period, watching doctors and nurses in high panic thinking, we don't know what to do. In pain and confusion, I lie there thinking, yeah, this is the end for me. And I've often wondered what I would feel. Some of you have been through much deeper and more profound experiences of that than I have. But it made me think, how am I going to react? Well, how am I reacting now? And if I'm honest, I wasn't scared. My faith wasn't shaken, but that would have been fine if it was. I wasn't resentful or angry. My overwhelming feeling was I was really disappointed. I thought, oh, really? There were so many things I was looking forward to. At that stage, we had 2 new grandchildren about to be born. I thought, I'll never meet that person. And then my other ones, well, they won't remember me. They're too young. I'll just be a name or a photo. All the experiences that I wanted to have, all the things that I thought, I'll get to that later, I was never going to do. I don't know if you've had that experiences, but it's really disappointing. But the reality is, one day I will die. I don't know when that's going to be. It could be today. It won't be in that distant a future, at least it doesn't feel that way now. All of us will have this experience. And what I want us to do today is, if we can, focus on that. I don't want to talk about grief, and I've spoken about that before, about how we deal with loss when we lose other people. I don't want to talk about the process of actually facing death or how to care for someone as they do that. I want to just talk about the stark reality that we die, that there is a finish to us, and how do we live in the light of that? Because that's what Ecclesiastes is all about, wrestling with this issue of how do I factor in the reality of death in my daily living? Because there's lots of ways you can think about death, isn't there? Let me give you some other ancient wisdom. Babylonian epic called Gilgamesh. Siduri is the barmaid to the gods, and she counsels Gilgamesh with these words. Gilgamesh, where are you hurrying to? You will never find that life for which you are looking. When the gods created man, they allotted to him death, but life they retained in their own keeping. As for you, Gilgamesh, fill your belly with good things. Day and night and day, dance and be merry, feast and rejoice. Let your clothes be fresh, bathe yourself in water. Cherish the little child that holds your hand, and make your wife happy in your embrace. For this too is the lot of man. Just enjoy today. It sounds like wise advice. Other people take the opposite. Don't hang on to those good things. Plato writes in his Phaedo, we meet Socrates responding to death, and he welcomes his own death, insisting confidently that's the liberation of the spirit from the body. At last I get out of this body. And so he's dying to die. And so he counsels his friends against any attachment to things in this life. Don't get caught up in daily life, is the advice of Socrates. Buddhists perhaps take that approach as well. It just causes suffering when you enjoy things. So let them go. Oh, well, that's how we should live. But how should you feel? Again, 2 contrasts. Seneca, in a letter to a friend, gives good Stoic advice. He says, dying well means dying gladly. What do you think of that? By contrast, the poet, Dylan Thomas, says this, do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage against the dying of the light. He's not dying well. He wrote this poem when he was watching his father die. Ironically, he died as a young man, I think 39, just after his dad died. What should we do? What do you answer for yourself? How do you feel about your own impending death, and how are you living in light of its coming? What difference does it make, or do you keep it out of mind? Death is a unique experience. There's nothing in life quite like it. The philosopher Wittgenstein put it this way: death is not an event in life. We do not live to experience it. Just think about that. Every other experience in life we can watch someone go through, or we ourselves have gone through it. Death is not like that. It's a one-way door. And you are not around to say what it's like. It just happens. So how do we think about it? The Greek philosopher Epicurus said, it's so foreign, don't even think about it. It's a waste of time thinking about death. Death, therefore, that most awful of evils, is nothing to us, seeing that when we are, death has not come, and when death has come, we are not. It is nothing then, either to the living or to the dead, for with the living it is not, and to the dead no longer exists. So don't worry your time even thinking about it. I don't think that's very helpful, because death does impact my life now. Death and life are not opposites in some sense, because I experience death in the midst of life, and in my life I will die. And so I need to think about death. And that's what Qoheleth is getting us to help think about. Freud said it's so hard for us. Most of us just push it out of our head. Every one of us is convinced of his immortality. And you feel that in your bones. Or not, we know in theory that we will die, but it's really hard to imagine your own death. I'm sure you've heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She wrote a book. It's not about dealing with grief, the stages of grief. That's not what it's about. It's about the grief of your own death. She was helping people in a hospice die. And so she writes about these stages or phases of death. And the first one is denial. No, it's not happening. This is not happening to me. You might know Ernst Becker's book, The Denial of Death. He says that human beings are unique amongst the animals, is that we have the capacity to anticipate the end of life. Now, whether that's true or not about other animals, we know certainly animals grieve, but certainly that's a heightened experience for human beings. We know this will happen to us. And he says, therefore, our culture develops ways to deny that reality. The way that we deny that is by trying to make ourselves something, to be heroic, to leave a legacy, which sound like good things. But he says what that results in is people fighting with one another for primacy. And if you fail or are weak or a struggle in life, you are a nobody. Because to have this victory over death, you've got to become something. And that seems to be the way society is structured. The people we look up to are the ones that succeed. I was on the wrong slide. Ecclesiastes says, therefore, this: it is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting. For death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. We should think about death. It doesn't mean that we will find it easy. I always think of Woody Allen, where he says, I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens. Some of us live like that, imagining that it's possible. Two things are unavoidable in life, death and taxes. Well, that's not true. I know lots of people who avoid paying tax, but you cannot avoid death. None of us can avoid it. I know a therapist friend. Have you ever drawn a timeline of your life of key events that have happened? You're born and this happens, you move here and you get married or whatever you do. She says, I want you to draw in the day that you think you would die. And people freak out. Oh, no, I don't want to put that in there. It's upsetting, it's distressing to think about that. What is it that we fear? What is it, when you think about your own death, how do you face it? I'm going to give you some thinking time. I'm going to play another song because it's nice to listen to songs about one person's reaction to death. Again, nice and loud if we can.
Oh, death. Oh,
Another year. Death, don't come yet. Why do we resist death so much? What is it? What are we seeking to avoid in anticipating our own death? What do you think? Why is it so hard for us to come to terms with this? Because it will happen. There's probably no wrong answer, so you can yell out. Frightened of the pain, so the process of dying, of actually getting there. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you kind of know what's happening now.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, what actually is on the other side of that door? Is there anything? Is there nothing? When death has come, then what am I? Saying goodbye, yeah. If you are conscious of the process of dying, some people don't have that opportunity, they're just snatched in an accident or whatever. But some of us will have the experience of knowing, and that's what I was lying in bed thinking, okay, these are my last days, what do I want to do now? What am I going to say to my kids? It's hard to know. What do I say? Or I sat with my dad, that's why I put the pictures there. On my 50th birthday was the last time I ever had a conversation with him. He didn't know it was my 50th birthday that day. And I thought, what do I say to him? What did he want to say to me? It's hard. How do you summarise a life in a conversation? We experience that in funerals, don't we? People get up and give eulogies. Oh, it's so hard to write my dad's eulogy. What do I say? Who you leave behind, yeah. I think that's a big thing for many of us. Who will look after those ones? I was thinking about that. Who will look? Don't my kids still need me? My wife? Who I leave behind? How will they cope? Maybe they'll be relieved. What is it that we are seeking to avoid? Clarence? Yeah, the fear of fear itself. That's very... Kennedy that said something like that? John F. Kennedy? And that's what I wondered. When I really thought I was going to die, how would I feel? Would I freak out or not? I didn't, but it's a weird experience.
Roosevelt, sorry.
Roosevelt, thank you. I knew someone would know. Yes, nothing to fear but fear itself, Roosevelt. Good man. This is what we're looking about in this book of Ecclesiastes. Because the teacher, Qoheleth, the preacher, the word just comes from one who gathers the congregation. That's why it's called Ecclesiastes, ecclesiastical meaning church. He's speaking to a congregation, preaching to them. And he's saying God has set this thing, we call it eternity in human hearts. That there is this sense in which we are more than just this mortal life, which sounds great. But it's a problem because we need to have an answer. Well, what is it, this eternity? And so it torments us because everything that we think is substantial has an end. It gets ruined by death. And so it makes life meaningless. That's the problem. And people have all sorts of answers. One interesting philosophical book, Being and Time, says we have this experience, but instead of reflecting upon it, we allow others to answer it for us. We allow society or family or other people to push us into living a certain way. We live inauthentic lives. The they tell us how to live. And Heidegger says we need to have a sense of mindness. This is why I live. This is the meaning of life for me. I need an answer for this question if I'm to be an authentic person. And if I don't have an answer, that sustains me in the light of death, then it's despairing. But most of us struggle to come up with an answer. He says, dying is not an event. It's a phenomenon to be understood existentially, to have a sense of existence or meaning for me. And I must think about my life in the light of my death. It's a way to be in the present. So it's not Kubler-Ross's acceptance of death at the end. It's to say, I live the reality of death every day in my daily existence. It's the way I be. Someone who thought a lot about death, who I think is very helpful, is a bloke called Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, as you might know, a Jewish man who went through and survived concentration camps and watched a lot of people die, a lot of people face that reality, and he watched how they responded. And he wrote some very helpful books. Search for Meaning, Man's Search for Meaning. But a subsequent book, he wrote Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning. And he writes this, I found this helpful. He says, I would like to quote Albert Einstein, another Jewish man. The man who regards his life as meaningless is not merely unhappy, but hardly fit for life. If you don't have meaning, Einstein says, and Frankl agrees, you're not fit for life. Indeed, survival is dependent on direction. That's what he witnessed in the concentration camps. However, survival cannot be the supreme value. Unless life points to something beyond itself, survival is pointless and meaningless. It is not even possible. This is the very lesson I learned in 3 years spent in Auschwitz and Dachau. And in the meantime, it has been confirmed by psychiatrists in prisoner of war camps. Only those who are oriented towards the future, towards a goal in the future, toward a meaning to fulfill the future, were likely to survive. We need meaning. But where do we get this meaning? The book continues. Did that click on? It turns out that there are 3 avenues that lead up to meaning fulfillment. First, doing a deed or creating a work. Second, experiencing something or encountering someone. In other words, meaning can be found not only in work, but also in love. Most important, however, is the third avenue. Facing a fate we cannot change, we are called upon to make the best of it by rising above ourselves and growing beyond ourselves. In a word, by changing ourselves. And this equally holds for the 3 components of the tragic triad: pain, guilt, and death. Inasmuch as we may turn suffering into human achievement and accomplishment, derive from guilt the opportunity to change for the better, and see in life's transitoriness, I can never say that word, an incentive to take responsible action. I would say that the Bible combines all of those 3 things to give meaning to life. What we do, how we live, the relationships of love that we have, and something that is beyond just the here and now. Those are the things that provide for us, through our relationship with God and each other, meaning for life beyond and including death. That's what this book of Ecclesiastes is getting us to think about. The book of Proverbs says, here are wise ways to live, try them and see. Book of Job and the book of Ecclesiastes say, yeah, we did and they don't work. Ecclesiastes makes you think for yourself. It does not provide the answers easily. It provokes hard questions. And it says, sit with these questions and ruminate on them. Chew like a cow on the cud. That's what meditating is. Contemplate. I'm reading a novel in the nights at the moment when I can't sleep by a bloke, Tim Winton. Got lots of interesting books. It's a story about this guy who was an environmental warrior who has a massive failure in life, a scandal he causes. And so he retreats to Fremantle in Western Australia in a little lonely unit, cuts himself off from everybody and just drinks all day, drinking himself into oblivion. And then some people come into his life. But he has this wonderful little expression, as Tim Winton does. It was much easier to fill a void than to contemplate it. That inner emptiness, this man just drinks to fill. Because it's hard to think about those questions in ourselves. We push them away. Ecclesiastes will not allow us to do that. He wants us to think, what is our life under the sun really all about? The questions are up front in the book. The words of the teacher or the preacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labours at which they toil under the sun? They do all this stuff and it amounts to nothing. And he goes through the book trying all sorts of things, a rich, powerful person, and so he can experience all these things, or at least in the thought experiment, and he says none of them satisfy. Why? I can't control what happens. Time and chance happen to everybody, and I never know the right time to do something or not do something. And death ruins everything. It makes life meaningless. Hevel, vanity, vapour, smoke. You can't grasp it. There is no meaning, he says. Nothing. Tolstoy, what meaning has my life that the inevitability of death does not destroy? What are you living for? Because your death will come, and then what? What have you achieved? What does your life mean? I just want to read you some stuff. I know it's lots of reading today, but I think this is incredibly powerful. Is that okay? I'm just going to read you some chunks out of Ecclesiastes. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet, I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this is also vanity. For the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me. For all is vanity and a striving after the wind. My grandchildren might remember me, but their children no, and their children have no chance. I don't know my great-grandparents. I've got no idea what they were like. I will be forgotten. There'll be no remembrance of me. My life, it might never have existed. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see what they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upwards and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than a man should do than to rejoice in his work, for that's his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? We all have the same end. So just enjoy the day. Live in the present. That's all you can do. It's not enough, but it's better than nothing. And then a long passage. It is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears as he who shuns an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But he who is joined with all the living has hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. Go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds you to do, do it with all your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge of wisdom in Sheol, to which you are going. Again, I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favour to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all. For man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, like birds that are caught in a snare. so the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. Hard words to hear, but true. One more. If a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many, and that all that comes is vanity. You'll be a long time dead. How do I live knowing this is true? How do I spend these few short years? If you were here at the beginning, we played a song by Paul Kelly, and he has words that go like this, using some lines from Shakespeare. I wasted time in his life. Now time is wasting me. I'm getting old. One question left, to be or not to be. I cheated time. Now it's time to pay. All out of change with less and less to say. I see old friends at funerals now and then. It's down to this. It's either me or them. Are we wasting our lives? How do I live knowing that I will die? What do we do with all that? Ecclesiastes has a fairly negative conclusion. How do you respond? What's your feeling as you hear all these words? What would you say to the preacher, the teacher, if you could speak back? What would you say?
I would say that in your life, touch others. And those others are affected by what you do. And that is your legacy.
So a legacy is touching others, the relationships of love that Frankel was talking about. We find meaning in that. Yep. Long after you're gone, those things remain. Hopefully that is true. Other things you would say?
Y'all need Jesus.
One more, Hugh.
Y'all need Jesus.
Y'all need Jesus. Thank you for that, American. Excellent. Okay, Jesus might have something to say about this or to do something about that, and we're going to get to that in a second. But we should not rush there. Some people have a very negative view of Ecclesiastes. I love this book. It was the second book I ever read when I started becoming a Christian. The first was Ephesians, but this one, it spoke to me as a young man because I was sitting in year 8 science, trying not to fall asleep on one of those uncomfortable chairs around the gas tap tables. You remember I used to have those? And I thought, why am I listening to this guy who's prattling on about just garbage? When can I get out of here? How many more years of this nonsense do I have to put up with until I get out of year 12? And then, hang on, when I go out of year 12, maybe I'll go to university and I'll have to hear more nonsense. How can I sustain this? And then I'll get a job, and I looked at the people working around me and none of them seemed very happy. And I think, my goodness, you just got 40 years of drudgery to look forward to. Maybe you're only happy when you retire. And I thought, how can I get to my retirement quickly? Life is meaningless. It undermines. There's a really good George Clooney movie where he talks to his brother-in-law who's on his wedding day, or future brother-in-law, and he says, I'm not going to get married. And he says, why? He says, an answer like I've just given, it's meaningless. Why am I making this big commitment? Because it's all going to end in death. What meaning do I have? We can despise life, but I don't think Koheleth despises life. I think the opposite is the truth. Another man who thought a lot about death and faced his own horrible death in a concentration camp was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And he says, it's only when one loves life and the world so much that without them everything would be gone that one can believe in the resurrection and a new world. There must be more than this. Otherwise, life is meaningless. Otherwise, life has only a very small meaning. Eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow we die. If that's all it is, well, then that's all it is. But is there more? What do we think about that? What about resurrection? There is no resurrection in Ecclesiastes. He says death is it. That's his thinking. The Bible is not uniform. There are tensions within the scripture. And through the First Testament and the New Testament, there is development and change. I hope you know that. People think about things differently. There are some glimmers of resurrection in the Old Testament, the First Testament. Daniel chapter 12 is one, but there isn't much. But by the time of Jesus, Jews had thought about this. They thought, if God is so good and faithful, death cannot be the end. And so their theology pushed them forwards to a belief in the resurrection. Not all Jews believed in the resurrection, the Sadducees didn't. But most had come to believe that there will be a resurrection. They disagreed about who will be raised, the righteous and the wicked, or just the righteous, and what will happen. But the resurrection was always seen this way. It is not just about me, it is about the whole creation being renewed and all people. It's a communal thing, because the priority for them is not the individual, but the group, the people of God, Israel. And secondly, it happens at the end of the age. No one thought one man would rise from the dead in the midst of time. No Jew understood the resurrection that way, which is none of his disciples could understand Jesus when he said, I am going to die and rise again. They said, yeah, at the end, like we all were. No, Jesus, now go and wait for me, because you'll see me again. Made no sense to them. This idea is hard to understand. Paul, the amazing Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 says, I don't get it either. What sort of body do we have, and what happens between dying and that day? I don't know. How are we the same and yet different? I don't know, says Paul. Read 1 Corinthians 15 if you want to know about the resurrection. But he's at the edge of his knowledge as well. I'm okay with that, because it's not knowledge that we need. It's confidence in a God that loves us. Knowledge puffs us up, but love does us good in wonderful ways, 1 Corinthians 13. That's what we need. What have I got next? Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when he appears, Christ appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is. That day in the future shapes how we live now. And everyone anyone who thus hopes in him purifies himself as he is pure. Resurrection life starts now. Because of this relationship built on hope and love through faith, it changes how we live. We live with meaning. We don't have to stress trying to make a name for ourselves, to hang on to some significance by our deeds. I don't need to worry about that. I don't need to worry that I'll be forgotten, because God will remember me. He knows me. And those who are raised with me will also know me, and I will know them. We shall know as we are fully known. And so I'm free to live generously, humbly, lovingly, serving other people. This is the resurrection life that begins now, but it only starts when I die today. That's what Jesus says. If you want to follow me, take up your cross every day, die. And death. Christianity runs on death and new life. It's hard to understand. What happens to the dead between their death and the return of Christ? No one knows. Karl Barth famously put God out of time and said the dead go into timelessness with God. Nicholas Wolterstorff said, no, that's Platonic. It's just, no, the dead do have some sequence in time. I don't know. Maybe the best picture of how it works is in the Transfiguration. You know that story? Jesus goes up on a mountain with a couple of his disciples, and he's suddenly glorious. Not with the glory of the resurrected Jesus that they meet at the empty tomb, but of the returning Jesus in all his glory. And with him are Elijah and Moses on the mountain. And some people say that it's not that they've been pulled out of the past as they meet with God on the same mountain, Sinai and Horeb, to offer and to meet God, but that God is somehow in this strange experience of time that we don't understand. I said to the kids, we have past, present, and future. Modern physics says that's not so. That's old physics. Einstein has turned that on its head. Time is not as simple as we think. Time and light bend. It's much more confusing than we realise. And maybe this is a glimpse into the timelessness of eternity. It's given in the context of Jesus speaking about his resurrection, which they don't understand. And he says, well, watch this. Now, that's very speculative on my behalf. I don't know if that's true or not. But it makes me think maybe there is just a picture that helps me understand that. That's how Indigenous people think about time. They live everywhere and every when. That's why connection to country is so important, connection to ancestors, because they're not just people of the past, they're people of the present. They live with their ancestors now, and they are the ancestors for the future generations. They continue the story. That's very Hebrew. That's a Jewish understanding of time. That's interesting, isn't it? We have a basis for hope. Ecclesiastes is never quoted in the New Testament, but there's a glimmer. The same word vanity, hevel, in its Greek version is translated there as frustration. The whole creation is frustrated, it's meaningless, because everything is corrupt and dying. There's entropy, there's time, there's change, and it all goes downhill. Paul says there will be a day of liberation, and we have that hope for us, and we live in the light of the hope of that day. That gives us meaning. Meaning beyond my death. Death is not the final word, and my confidence is that Jesus himself has been risen. I am now a child of God, is where he starts. Now. And I know that. On my bed, as I thought about the end of my life, I was certain that God was with me. I knew he was there and that he loved me, and I didn't have to fret. It was okay, even though I didn't know what was going on. I was his child. My question as I get out of the sickbed is, do I keep living that way? Do I really live with that hope, or do I get diverted into other things? That's a question perhaps you can answer for yourself. If we live for the Lord. If we die for the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. This is the most important thing. It's through what Jesus has done. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those from who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. You don't have to be frightened of death anymore. Be free from that stress, that despair, that meaninglessness. This is the victory that Jesus has for us. This is why we believe, not because we're weak and hopeless, but because we need an answer to the meaninglessness of life in the light of death. I want to finish off by reading another wise man. Is that okay with all these readings? I know it's a lot more reading than normal, but Erasmus was a very wise man. He had this in his book, Preparing for Death. This preparation for death must be practiced through our whole life. And the spark of faith must be continually fanned so that it grows and gains strength. Love, joined to it, will attract hope, which gives no cause for shame. None of these things, however, comes from us. Rather, they are gifts of God to be sought by continuous prayers and petitions if we lack them. If they should be present, they must be strengthened so that they grow. The stronger is our faith, accompanied by love and hope, the more diminished is our fear. An action continually repeated will become a habit. The habit will become a state, and the state will become part of your nature. I think they're wonderful words. This reflection on death and the meaning of life becomes a habit that eventually becomes who we are, a way of being. And that's liberty. That's liberation from any fear of meaninglessness and death. That's how resurrection impacts us. It means, says Paul, that I can go and live or die, it doesn't matter. If I'm here, I'm going to work for the good of others, is what he says to the Philippians. I'd rather go and be with Jesus, but I guess that God's got work for me to do, and so if I've got a day, I'm going to spend it for his kingdom. Isn't that how we could live? Take each day as a gift. Enjoy being in the present. Yeah, enjoy your food, enjoy your wine, enjoy your wife or your husband. But know, in the present, God's goodness to us. We are not simply waiting to die one day. We are dying to live every day. That's the way of life, to die that we might live. Very final reading. I'm going to give you an example. One of the helpful commentaries that I read on Ecclesiastes was by a bloke called John Golden Gay. He's a professor, he was a professor of Old Testament at Fuller Seminary. He wrote a commentary, and while he was doing it, stuff was happening in his life. And this is what he says. When I first wrote these notes, my wife Anne was lying on the sofa at the other end of the room to safeguard against her getting pressure sores. She has multiple sclerosis. 20 years ago, she worked as a psychiatrist. A few weeks previously, we had received a Christmas card from one of her psychotherapy patients who remembers the sessions she had with Anne and looks back on them with a decisive shaping influence on her life. Today, Anne cannot remember what country she lives in, nor what day it is, nor what are the names of her two caretakers who have shared in looking after her for over 2 years, nor what is the name of the grandson who brought her such joy when he was here a few weeks ago. She is unable to swallow, she eats via a feeding tube, or to speak. She was watching the television news. I'm not sure how much she takes in. On that news, we've been hearing of those terrible costs of the Russian invasion of Chechnya, of the suffering of the local people and of the Russian bodies surrounding their tanks. The pictures were too grim to show us. In a moment, I will take her out for a walk in her wheelchair in the warm winter sun, and we will have an ice cream. If we are lucky, she'll be able to eat a little of it. And as I push her back up the hill to our apartment, I will sing silly songs and pretend I'm not going to make it up to the top, and she will laugh. It is not enough, but it is not nothing. And it is certainly not to be despised. It is a gift from God. This is what Ecclesiastes says. We need to be real about the horrors of death and decay, and that we face real grief. And this message of Jesus that he believes in doesn't fix everything. But it's not nothing. It's not enough, but it's not nothing. We enter into this relationship with a God who loves us, and he calls us into a communion with him. The Christian faith starts in a cemetery. That's where it's born. The church is born in a cemetery and a tomb that is opened. And Jesus says, come and meet me, the one who died and is risen. And that's what we're going to do as we share together in communion. It's all about saying, my life now is found, its meaning is found in union with this Jesus who lived and died and rose again. And I die to live for him. So I live freely, joyfully, enjoying each day as a gift to serve and love others and live for his kingdom. If that's you, you're invited to come and share eating and drinking. Is that okay? I didn't warn you, Sam. Do you reckon you could play a little bit of background as we do this? Whatever grabs your fancy. If you would like to share in this communion, come and grab it. Grab a little piece of bread and a cup and go back to your seat, and then we'll eat and drink together.